I'm Poindexter G with To the Tabletop, and today we are going to take a look at the Genie from Unmatched. Now, the Genie is from the set Houdini versus the Genie, and we have the titular Genie here with a mini that is just amazing. I love all the swirls that's going on here. You can see the lamp down there at the bottom that he's actually coming out of. All of this flourish on it here. This is great stuff. The color scheme that we have, purple is his main color, but we've got like all these pinks and golds in there. Going to the Genie. The Genie is a ranged fighter with a health of 16 and a move of 3. We'll see his special ability, named Infinite Power, is at the start of your turn, you may discard one card to gain one action. Yep, that's right. Bloody Mary's like, if I'm careful and I go through the game and manipulate my hand properly and manage to have 3 cards at the start of my turn, I could get a third action. And the Genie's like, I could just toss away a card and get a third action. So, yeah. Genie. Now we're going to see that the theme here with the Genie is that the Genie will give you your wishes, but he's a little bit of a sly guy there, and there may be some nasty things that happen because of your wish. We're also going to see a theme kind of come from his ability here. In this case, discarding a card to gain an action. We're going to see a lot of his cards use other cards as resources. So there is a potential way to play Genie as a very, very powerful, just kind of rush down fighter who will just go after you and wipe you out very, very quickly. But he is going to use a ton of cards doing it. All right, so let's go ahead and start off, and we're going to start off with this scheme. And the reason I'm starting off with this scheme is that there are ramifications to other cards in the deck because of this scheme, and we've kind of got to go over this one first. This is definitely the most powerful card in Genie's deck. It is 3 wishes, a scheme, as I said, and it makes sense. It's a boost of 3, but you're never going to use it for that. The 3 wishes is gain 1 action and choose 1 effect. So you get to gain an action and do one of these effects here. Draw 5 cards. 5 cards, people. Draw 5 cards. Now, it is important to remember that the thing where you drop down to discard down to 7 cards is at the end of your turn, discard down to 7 cards. That's down here on the back of everybody's character card. So on your opponent's turn and during your turn, you can have more than 7 cards in your hand. It's just at the end that you would discard down. So drawing 5 cards, you could do that during your turn while you've got 4 or 5 cards in hand and have quite a few in hand there. The second option is for the rest of your turn, your cards' values are 4 and cannot be changed. As you can see, the Genie's cards don't have really big values on them. So being able to change everything to a 4 can be really powerful. And the last option is each opponent. That is each opponent. So if you're doing this in a 2v2 or a free-for-all game, it's going to be every opponent discards 2 cards. And you can do any of these here. These all gain action, so you can like save up, get all 3 wishes in hands and just play them sequentially. Gaining an action is pretty strong, especially when Genie can already start off with a third action. So we'll take a look at his other cards here. This is the Genie's only printed 4. Careful what you wish for. The Genie, boost of 2 after combat. If you lost the combat, deal 1 damage to an adjacent opposing fighter. So if you lose the combat, you can deal some damage. It's not a really huge effect there. And of course, This changing values to 4 doesn't do anything in this case. I am freed. 2 copies of this. This is an attack of 3, a boost of 2. After combat, place the genie in any empty space, then deal 1 damage to each opposing fighter. So this lets him move around the board, deal damage if he drops next to somebody. You got to remember that he's ranged, so he could hit anybody in the zone once he moves over to another space. And since he's got several ways of gaining actions, he can do quite a bit there. Your wish is my command. An attack of 3, boost of 1. After combat, if you won the combat, you may discard 2 cards to gain an action. So you have to win to do this. You're not going to win a lot with a 3. But if you make it a 4, you have a better chance of winning and being able to get that effect off. You do have to discard 2 more cards to get that action, but it could potentially be worth it. Imprisoned Wrath, 2 copies, an attack of 3, boost of 1. After combat, you may discard 2 cards to deal 2 damage to an opposing fighter. So discarding 2 cards that's a lot of cards to discard, but it can be 2 damage. Could it be worth it? Well, it depends on what you get in hand with the genie. If you start getting into a spot where you have a ridiculous amount of cards in hand, because this is not the only really potentially absurd draw effect in the genie's deck. There's something coming up that can be just as absurd as this on the draw. I'm going to go back in the lamp. 3 copies of this. This is a printed 0 defense. Okay, but hold on. Boost of 1. Immediately, the genie recovers 4 health. Okay, immediately. So, what's the big rule in Unmatched? The big rule in Unmatched is defender resolves first. That's correct. So this is a defense card. It's immediate. The first thing that will happen is the genie will recover 4 health. So if you are sitting at 12 or less health, you'll gain 4 health and then get hit with something and go down. So this is kind of a defense of 4, except it's a little bit better than a defense of 4, because if you get hit with something less than a 4, you'll actually net gain a little bit of health on it there. You know, if it's something that's just going to hit you for 3, well, you'll actually end up gaining 1 because of that. This is a really interesting way to do it. Also, with this being an immediate defense effect, there's no way for that to get canceled because it will be the first thing that happens. So it's a uncancelable card. So there's something I thought about concerning this card after I had filmed this, and that is the fact that this is a 0, has some weird ramifications. So even though you do get that 4 health that basically makes this a 4, technically, since this is a 0, you are going to lose against literally anything that you play this into. It doesn't matter what attack it is, you're going to lose because you're throwing out a 0. Now that can have ramifications for a lot of your opponent's card effects. Bullseye has a lot of things that kick in if he has 1 already in a combat, so this is something that could give him that. And going up against something like Medusa's Gaze of Stone, this could actually be pretty terrible. So definitely something to keep in mind when playing this card against certain fighters. Prisoner's Torment. Okay, this is one I talked to you a little bit about earlier. A defense of 1, boost of 2. After combat, draw cards equal to the amount of damage you took. If you were to get hit with something big, you could end up drawing a stupid amount of cards. And since this is a defense card, you will be drawing on your opponent's turn, which means you will have your entire next turn, all the way to the end of that turn, to be able to figure out what you're going to do with those cards. This is a card here that, depending on what this is played into, could give Genie a stupid amount of cards in hand and could cause some really nasty things to happen and give Genie a potential huge, massive turn. It can also make things very interesting for your opponent if it's something where they have to boost or discard cards to bump up their effect. They have to start thinking about how much they actually want to boost that up, because yeah, they could boost it and get that attack higher, but it's just going to give Genie a bunch of cards. And it's interesting that we have that going on when Genie is in a box with Houdini, who just loves to boost his cards and do crazy things. So it's got some ramifications there that can make it interesting on Houdini to decide what he's going to do. All right, going into our versatiles, we have Wishing for More Wishes, versatile of 3, boost of 2. After combat, your opponent draws 1 card. Draw 3 cards. One of the few cards that makes your opponent draw a card. Drawing 3 cards can be a pretty big effect, so I guess, letting your opponent draw 1 to keep the hand disparity from getting too crazy could be good. I would say that, except that we've got these 2 things here that let you just go gonzo on drawing cards, so, it's kind of weird that it's the 3 cards that lets them draw 1. I've made Sultans of Less, versatile of 2, 1 boost. After combat, look at your opponent's hand and choose a card for them to discard. So a way to just look at someone's hand and pull cards out of their hand. So I think part of the reason that we have a look at your opponent's hand and choose a card for them to discard is because of the card that Houdini has, Houdini being in this same box. If an effect would let an opponent look at your hand, you may reveal this card and cancel that effect. Because this card exists in Houdini's deck, they kind of needed to give the other fighter in Houdini's box a card that lets them look at it, so this can actually be played in the box for that passive effect. So that's the reason why this has to be in there. I grant you Death, versatile of 2, boost of 1. After combat, you may deal 1 damage to an adjacent fighter. So if you're adjacent to someone, you get to deal a damage to them. Interesting that we've got a couple cards here that can deal damage to an adjacent fighter when this guy is ranged. So, some of these effects you want to be next to it. This is no parlor trick. Versatile of 1, boost of 2. The value of your opponent's card is equal to its boost value. Okay, most of the time, this is pretty good here, because most attacks will end up dropping down. Now, there are some that can have some interesting things on it there. Anything that has a higher boost value than what it actually attacks at would be bad. And then something that actually sets it during combat, Momentous Shift being a great example here. Momentous Shift is during combat. If you started in a different space, the value of this card is 5 instead. The way that this would go is, since the Unmatched rule is Defender resolves first, this would set their card equal to the boost value, because if you use this as a defense, this would be happening first, and then Momentous Shift would kick in as an attack, so that during combat would happen after, and then it would change it to a 5. So there are times that this will end up being pretty bad for you, especially with a 1 as a defense. It just depends on what you end up playing it into. This might be one a lot of times, depending on against certain fighters, might be better as a card to discard and throw away, since you need some cards to be able to discard and throw away. And lastly, 3 copies of Feint. Yes, Genie just has a regular good old Feint, versatile 2, boost of 1. Immediately cancel all effects on your opponent's card. So we're looking at that there, and we see that there are several cards here that can let you use cards as kind of a resource. The ability lets you do that, so you could gain an action, discard a card at the start of your turn, use 3 wishes to do a number of crazy things. We can look at some of these. You know, if you're doing the rest of your turn, your card's values are 4 and cannot be changed. There's certain cards that suddenly get much stronger, such as this is no parlor trick as a 4. You know, this being a 4 and changing the boost value of your opponents to something else, it suddenly becomes really, really strong there. Any of these that are 2s, I mean, you know, 4 that lets you also look at your opponent's hand and discard it can be pretty crazy. Offensive feint, when you can make this a 4, that's suddenly a 4 value cancel attack. That can be really strong. Of course, most of these other cards here, everything except careful what you wish for, is a bit better as a 4. So there's a lot of these that if you make them a 4, you know, you're doing quite a bit on there. You know, parlor trick and feint, I think, could be really great attacks as 4s. You can also do some Sherlock type stuff here, being able to look at your opponent's hand and see what's in there. Then playing something like this, which lets them discard cards, so you could actually use that to see what's in their card, pull away what you really want gone out of there, play this and make them lose some more. And I said, these guys can stack and just, you know, if you play these 3 sequentially and you have a bunch of cards in hand, you know, man, you can do a lot when you have a lot of cards in hand, because you can just discard a card and gain an action. You can start doing 2 damage by discarding cards with this. You turn this into a 4, you have a much higher chance of winning and be able to discard some more cards to gain an action. So you can see how Genie building up a huge hand is just not a good thing. I mean, it's kind of like Dracula or Jekyll and Hyde getting huge hands. It's just like, oh man, this is scary. It's kind of the same thing with Genie, that he can do some nutty stuff there. And really, this printed 0 here on back in the lamp that you recover health immediately is just such a neat effect that is a different way of doing things there. It's not even really like changing the rules or anything. It's just making a card that does something a little bit different than what we've seen before. So if you found this video interesting, give it a thumbs up and a like. You could go down into the comments section and leave any thoughts or questions that you have down there. You can also go to my channel and check out my videos, and also subscribe so that you can make sure that you catch everything and don't miss anything that I post. This is Poindexter G at To The Tabletop, and we'll see you around next time.